Tonight, how a single software update caused a global technical crash.
I am so upset right now.
Flights grounded, border delays, hospital disrupted after an IT failure turned millions of screens blue.
You would think there'd be a backup plan.
We break down who's to blame and why it could happen again. The growing calls for Biden to drop out.
The president is not capable of delivering the message in an effective way.
The private push and public defiance. Wildfires grow in BC, flames and smoke spread.
We're getting ash falling on our cars, on our decks.
Why it could get worse this weekend.
From CBC News, this is The National with Ian Hannamansing.
Systems are coming back online tonight, but some problems still persist after a major tech outage overnight. Airports, banks, broadcasters, and hospitals still recovering after a cybersecurity company pushed out a software update that plunged the world into chaos. It caused mass computer crashes in country after country, including Canada, essentially locking people and businesses out of their systems for hours. Flights were grounded, healthcare affected. Now, cyber experts are warning about having so many companies relying on the same technology. Katie Nicholson is tracking the fallout tonight around the globe, where for hours confusion and frustration reigned.
A morning of chaos that swept across the globe.
Who is your representative? Who is your manager?
All because of a glitch in one company's routine software update.
It's quite crowded out there, as you can see. It's very hard to speak to the representatives.
From Bangkok to Berlin to Toronto, scenes of frustrated passengers.
You would think there'd be a backup plan someplace.
In the U.S., normally packed commercial airspace thinned out, almost emptied, as computers crashed.
I am so upset right now.
Forcing those on the ground to hunker down and wait. It also hit the financial sector, including TD, which warned clients of long wait times. What all these companies have in common? They're customers of CrowdStrike, a cybersecurity firm.
I want to start with saying we're deeply sorry for the impact that we've caused to customers, to travelers, to anyone affected by this, including our companies.
Within hours, its CEO said the problem had been identified as a bug in an update from Microsoft systems. A fix was made available, but the effects, though short-lived, were far-reaching. Some 911 calls and dispatch systems dropped in Edmonton.
We had a fair number of them go down, but we were able to continue operations, and we still were able to see the calls coming into the queue.
Many healthcare providers across Canada warned of disrupted services and appointments.
I went in there to pay a bill, which is due in a couple of days, and they're telling me the system is down.
As it turns out, U.S. Customs is also a CrowdStrike client, resulting in long lines at the border. In the UK, a news network bumped off the air for an hour. CBC News not immune. Many of our own teams greeted with this frowny face as their computers were fired up. Even the happiest place on earth couldn't escape the bug. Blue screens in Disneyland Paris. When it comes to technology, it's a small world after all.
So, Katie, after hours of chaos throughout the day, how are things looking tonight?
Well, Air Canada and WestJet weren't directly impacted, but Porter was. They have started to resume flights, and they're trying to clear that backlog. But it's only now we're starting to get a sense of the real human impact of this bug. The Canada Child Benefit may be delayed. Globally, some payroll systems were impacted. And then there are the lingering questions about how this could have happened in the first place and what needs to happen to make sure it doesn't happen again. Ian?
Katie Nicholson at Toronto's Billy Bishop Airport. Canadians have dealt with big tech disruptions before, like that Rogers outage 2 years ago. Anis Haydari shows us how it's raising concerns about having too few companies with too much power.
A major technical failure takes millions offline, resulting in an ocean of the so-called blue screen of death. It might remind Canadians of 2 years ago, when a Rogers outage paralyzed communications. That time around, a system update went very badly. CrowdStrike's outage, similar deal.
This update was the source of things going wrong. And so the computers, when they read this file, it started going into an infinite loop of rebooting.
Updates like this are supposed to be tested before they're released, but we don't have details in this case.
Many of the millions of computers affected have to be fixed in person, not a quick fix. Plus, just as this outage was happening, another unrelated Microsoft system went down. Just like with Rogers, only 1 or 2 companies are behind these failures.
Maybe we need to have a deep conversation about where government's role is in regulating tech companies to make sure all of our eggs in every single critical industry are not concentrated in so few companies.
Unsurprisingly, cybersecurity rivals want more competition too.
I work for one vendor, and if you have more diversity in the market, then it reduces risk of this happening on a mass scale in this way.
But the tech sector often leans towards fewer and bigger players.
In tech, we're not talking about 30, 40 companies. There's really a core 10 to 20 that run the global IT infrastructure.
CrowdStrike may face big consequences. Its stock price dropped, with more issues to come.
There's going to be months, probably years of litigation, legal issues that they're going to have to deal with.
Add to that a bad reputation, because if CrowdStrike wasn't a household name in tech before, it certainly is now. Anis Hidari, CBC News, Calgary.
U.S. President Joe Biden has been briefed on the tech outage, but his more pressing challenge, the growing pressure to end his re-election bid. Today, more Democrats came out calling on him to step aside, but as Richard Madden explains, publicly, Biden is digging in.
Vice President Kamala Harris is now taking the lead on the campaign trail as President Joe Biden continues his self-isolation with COVID, where behind the scenes, his inner circle is reportedly exploring an exit plan. Publicly, though, the campaign is sending a message of defiance, insisting the president isn't leaving.
We know that we've slipped a bit from the debate, and we know that the president has to prove to the American people exactly what he believes, that he's in this to win this, he can do this.
Biden's campaign hoped to move the spotlight away from his leadership crisis to the stark contrast presented by his Republican challenger, Donald Trump. But that plan has been derailed. More Democrats are now publicly calling on Biden to step aside, panicked over his sliding poll numbers and cash from big donors drying up.
The president is not capable of delivering the message in an effective way. And I don't see how anyone could debate that. There have been countless examples.
Concerns reportedly echoed privately by party elders Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi. Now, more than 30 congressional Democrats are on record calling for Biden's exit. Time for you to pass the torch. Your age and fitness are jeopardizing what should be a winning campaign. Your candidacy is on a trajectory to lose.
I'm riding with Biden, and that's not going to change. What would it take for me to change my mind? It would take him changing his.
Biden's campaign has warned detractors there is no alternative nominee. Some accusing those plotting Biden's ouster are also pushing to dump his vice president.
A lot of them are not just interested in removing the president. They are interested in removing the whole ticket.
Democratic commentator Roland Martin calls the turmoil self-inflicted.
These Democrats are saying, oh, he's dragging us down. You drag down yourself.
So is all this pressure forcing Biden to dig in or be open to the possibility of passing?
I think he's digging in, and he's, and I totally get it.
Richard Biden still in isolation tonight, but we're now hearing when he's planning to return to the campaign trail.
Yeah, Ian, the president issued a statement earlier today confirming he will return to the campaign next week. Locations haven't been announced yet, but Biden says he'll make the case for his own record and expose the threat of Donald Trump. In the meantime, Biden's doctors say his symptoms are improving, but his health and vitality continue to be major issues for voters.
Richard Madden in Washington. A funeral was held in Pennsylvania today for the man killed at last weekend's Trump rally. That fire truck carrying the body of Corey Comparator ahead of today's private service. The 50-year-old former fire chief was killed last Saturday during the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Officials say Comparator shielded his family from gunfire. The UN's highest court has ruled Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories is illegal, finding settlements there should be withdrawn as soon as possible. This opinion isn't binding, but as Sasha Petrusik reports, it could sway international opinion.
The ruling is not binding, but it is clear.
The state of Israel's continued presence in the occupied territory is unlawful.
The UN's top court found Israel has no right to control Palestinian territories it captured more than 50 years ago, the West Bank and East Jerusalem. No right to build Jewish settlements there. The settlements have been expanding at a record pace, pushed by key Israeli cabinet ministers, fervent settlers themselves who want to annex the territories. That and tensions after the October 7th attacks by Hamas has stoked violent confrontations, settlers attacking neighboring villages, Palestinians killed. The court says soldiers and settlers have to evacuate immediately, a ruling cheered by Palestinians.
This means Israel is under an obligation to end this illegal colonial enterprise unconditionally. And in our view, that means immediately and totally.
Israel, whose parliament overwhelmingly rejected Palestinian statehood this week, calls the ruling absurd. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu posting that the Jewish people are not occupiers in their own land, our ancestral home.
I think it's a bombshell.
The ruling directs other countries to treat Israel's occupation as illegal.
I don't think Israel will be able to ignore it because I think the majority of the member states of the United Nations will not ignore it. They will look at it as guidance.
Settler violence has already prompted Canada, the US, and European countries to sanction extremists and push Israel harder for a Palestinian state. The World Court just gave legal justification. Sasha Petrusik, CBC News, Toronto.
Yemen's Houthi rebels are claiming responsibility for a deadly overnight drone strike on Tel Aviv. Cell phone video captured the moment the drone flew ashore and exploded. One person was killed, at least 10 wounded. The Iran-backed Houthis have previously launched drones and missiles towards Israel, but until today, they had all been intercepted. There are indications tonight that Canada's icy relationship with China is beginning to thaw. The two countries' foreign affairs ministers met today in Beijing for the first time in years. Kate McKenna looks at what both sides hope to gain.
This is the first major sign of improved Canadian-Chinese relations in 7 years. A visit from Canada's foreign minister so significant it made the evening news in China. In a statement, the Chinese government acknowledged difficulties and twists and turns in recent years, but also says it is in the fundamental interests of both countries and peoples to maintain and develop good bilateral relations.
I think it's as close to an olive branch as we're going to get from China. I think it speaks to the changing global reality. Both Canada and China can see growing global instability and conflict in the world, and in particular, the possibility of Trump 2.0 in the United States.
Relations soured after China's detention of Canadians Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. Detentions Canada says were arbitrary. They were further strained by reports of Chinese political interference in Canadian politics. But now both sides seem willing to work on some things together.
China's Canada's second largest export market, despite the tensions around the Madame Meng Wanzhou affair and the two Michaels. China's still a key market for us. And so I think this is where, for China, the preference is to have positive relations with Canada.
The significance of this meeting is simply the fact that it took place and that channels of communication have been reopened.
But that openness to working together doesn't mean that China and Canada now agree on everything. China implied Canada should butt out of what it calls internal matters in Taiwan and Hong Kong, and Canada says it'll always stand up for democracy and its values, including human rights. Kate McKenna, CBC News, Ottawa.
Quebec MP Stephen McKinnon has been sworn in as the new Minister of Labour. McKinnon has been serving as Liberal House Leader. He replaces Seamus O'Regan, who announced his resignation from Cabinet yesterday. O'Regan says he's stepping down to spend more time with family and won't seek re-election. In BC, wildfire crews are bracing for a tough weekend ahead, with hot, dry weather fueling fires across the province. Here's a look at the situation tonight. Things are changing quickly, but right now about 300 fires are burning. Georgie Smythe shows us what fire crews are dealing with and what the next 48 hours could bring.
Fully engulfed, consuming everything in its path, the whole valley.
Fire is on the move in BC's interior, crawling up parched mountainsides and lighting up night skies.
Devouring everything in its path.
One of the most concerning fires is burning west of Kamloops. It more than doubled in size on Thursday night.
We have gotten confirmation that that there was some structures destroyed last night.
And forced people to flee, including more than 70 people from an off-the-grid Hare Krishna community.
The weather was insane. Everything moved so quickly. We were, preparing in any case, but we thought we had a little more time to prepare.
Small communities were all intertwined, and so we all feel for our friends and neighbors who find themselves in the position of being evacuated.
Hot, dry, windy conditions are making it easier for fires and debris to spread.
But we're getting ash falling on our cars, on our decks, on our houses, which is very disconcerting for people.
Unsettling too is the thick smoke shrouding communities, prompting air quality warnings in the north and acting as a reminder that fire risk is high across the province. BC's wildfire service warning this weekend could be challenging, especially with storms in the forecast.
If the fuels are very dry, which they are, it increases the ability of a lightning strike to actually catch something on fire.
Which is why a campfire ban also remains in effect across the province. There's not a lot of relief in the forecast either. Heat warnings remain in place for most of BC, with no sign of rain until early next week. Georgie Smythe, CBC News, Vancouver.
The Calgary Zoo says it's investigating after the sudden death of one of its 2 polar bears. According to the zoo, the 2 bears were sparring in a pool late this morning when one of them, a 7-year-old named Baffin, went underwater and failed to resurface. The exhibit has since been closed and a necropsy is underway to try to determine why the bear died. Bangladesh has been under a nationwide curfew as student protests have led to violent clashes in the streets. Why students in Canada are trying to raise awareness. Next. Plus, a grim day for an American journalist.
We're not going to stop until we get Evan home.
How Evan Gerskovich is now facing years behind bars in Russia. And the software update that caused a global outage.
Who is your representative? Who is your manager?
Why it's likely to happen again. We're back in 2. Some scary moments in Bulgaria when a wildfire blew into a village. Residents fled, but some of their horses couldn't be saved. Bulgaria and neighboring countries have been fighting a rash of fires for days now as a heat wave grips the already dry region. In Bangladesh tonight, a curfew is in place as student protests rock the country. Already dozens have been killed, but the exact number hard to pinpoint because of a communication shutdown. As Julie Wong explains, that's also making it difficult for Canadians worried about loved ones back home.
Violence erupts in Dhaka as students fill the streets. Clashes between protesters and police left buildings damaged and vehicles charred as casualties climb. 2 students were shot in front of me, this protester says. Now the military has been called in and a curfew announced. The demonstrators are angry over a government quota for civil service jobs. Up to 30% are earmarked for descendants of veterans of the 1971 War of Independence from Pakistan. It makes no sense, says this protester. A normal state cannot be run like this. But anti-government grievances run deeper, according to this expert.
The rising cost of living, inflation, even the employment is being disrupted in ways that
that could have made a way and a venue for them to live better. This really leads to this volcanic eruption that we're seeing.
In response, the government is disrupting telecommunications, crippling phone, text, and television services. One news channel went off the air without warning. CM Khalid Saifullah came to Canada as a grad student from Bangladesh. He's now grappling for any information about his father and two brothers.
Yeah, definitely I'm worried about that. Bangladesh is out of the whole world in terms of connectivity. It cannot be the sign of a democracy.
In Toronto, dozens held a silent protest outside the Consul General of Bangladesh.
We want all violence to stop right at this moment. It is inhuman. It's impossible for us to sit here and do anything except for let the world know.
The federal government is advising Canadians to avoid non-essential travel to Bangladesh, saying the security situation could deteriorate without warning. Julia Wong, CBC News, Edmonton.
An American journalist detained in Russia is now facing the prospect of many years behind bars.
When I was looking at it, I was like crying because it's just surreal.
What his sentence means and the diplomatic efforts to bring him home. Plus, global chaos after an IT glitch.
The biggest outage the world has seen.
Breaking down how the outage unfolded and just how vulnerable we are.
Your total is $250, okay?
And in a cost of living crisis, consumers look to save on groceries.
You can make this 3-course date night dinner for just $15.
Why dollar stores are moving in to fill the need. The National breaks down the story shaping our world. Next. The captain of Japan's women's artistic gymnastics team has withdrawn from the Olympic Games. The Japanese Gymnastics Association says 19-year-old Shoko Miyata violated the team's rules by smoking and drinking alcohol. The women's squad will have to compete with 4 athletes instead of 5. They have been hoping to win their first medal since the 1964 Tokyo Olympics. A Russian court has found American journalist Evan Gershkovich guilty of espionage. He's been sentenced to 16 years in prison. But as Briar Stewart explains, that conviction is also sparking some hope in the United States.
As the judge read out the verdict, Evan Gershkovich stood in the prisoner's box, appearing thinner but calm. The Wall Street Journal reporter had to have known it would likely come to this. Russian courts almost always convict the accused, and trials for espionage are held behind closed doors until there's a verdict. The prosecutor said the court established that Gershkovich was working for the CIA when he was gathering information about a Russian tank factory. From the moment Gershkovich was arrested in 2023, the Wall Street Journal and U.S. officials decried the charges, declaring him wrongfully detained. They described his trial as a sham. Gershkovich's trial was supposed to continue next month, but his defense team pushed to move it up, and that has some hoping that there may be momentum for a prisoner swap.
I want to think it's a good signal.
Sonia Groisman used to work with Gershkovich in Moscow and has been corresponding with him while he's in prison.
Even if we all knew it's gonna happen, when I was looking at it, I was like crying because it's just surreal.
Russian officials have previously said that there can only be exchanges once there's a verdict. 4 months after U.S. basketball player Brittany Griner was convicted of drug smuggling, she was traded for a notorious Russian arms dealer.
We're working it as we speak, and we're not going to stop until we get Evan home, we get Paul Whelan home.
Whelan is a former Marine and also a Canadian citizen.
The prisons here are very, very different than the prisons at home.
This spring, he called CBC News from a penal colony. He was also convicted of espionage and has been imprisoned for nearly 6 years. During this whole time, he's been holding out for some kind of deal. And now officially convicted, so too is Gershkovich. Briar Stewart, CBC News, London.
Now it's time to dig deeper into the news shaping our world.
Name brand products, excellent.
A possible dollar store solution to Canada's cash-burning food costs. But first,
we've seen the chaos that's in the airport.
The biggest outage the world has seen.
Everything from grocery stores to airports, a world frozen in blue.
That screen is not normal.
Blue screen of death.
A traditional blue screen.
How a single software update broke the brittle systems that help keep our lives going. Lauren Bird traces the system collapse as it circled the globe, how it started, and its painstaking road to resolution.
People in Australia felt it first, while much of North America was still asleep. At about 3:30 p.m. local time, according to the Home Affairs Minister, a massive tech outage hit. Companies and organizations started reporting this, known as the blue screen of death. Computers went down and took tons of services with them, including banks and hospitals, and broadcasters off the air.
For our viewers who are tuning in, and as Tom said, this is an extraordinary situation. Our studio's down with this breach as well. When I call it a breach, though, it's not a malicious one.
Right, this wasn't a cyber attack. At 5:45 a.m. Eastern, the cybersecurity company CrowdStrike said an update to its software was to blame. A glitch in that software caused it to react badly with some Microsoft-based systems.
The problem with the CrowdStrike software is that when it stops working, the whole computer stops working, and the computer won't even turn on at this point. And not only does that mean you can't do any work, but it also means it's hard to fix the problem.
And as the hours went on, that problem got a lot bigger, because CrowdStrike is used by organizations around the globe. Fortune 500 companies, major banks, energy companies, airlines. And as the rest of the world started their day,
Sir, if I am missing my US flight, Qatar flight, what will happen? What you will do?
that faulty update rippled across systems, causing outages almost everywhere and disrupting everything from airports to 911 services.
So they're saying that they have a pan-India system outage at the moment, and that is also why they were not able to send out any information through either SMS or an email.
Officials in Europe were already getting a grasp on how bad the issue was. Germany's cybersecurity chief warned people it would be a long day. And in Paris, where the world is arriving for next week's Olympics,
arrived in Paris this morning and went to go get my accreditation validated, but been told no, pretty much.
So by the time North Americans woke up, the outage had been playing out for hours. And again, people couldn't even log into their computers. Several hospitals across Canada said they had to find workarounds to keep services going. There were lineups at the border and delays at the airports. American Airlines, United, Delta, and Porter all grounded flights.
We got here like 9:30 a.m. When we arrived, we were just told to come back at 12 because everything was down. So we've been waiting since 9:30.
And by this time, CrowdStrike had been doing damage control and trying to get things back online.
We've been on, with our customers all night and working with them. Many of the customers are rebooting the system, and it's coming up, and it'll be operational because of, we fixed it on our end.
But this wouldn't be an easy fix.
This is not something that can just be fixed with all the computers remotely over the internet. It's something that individual system administrators are going to have to fix one PC at a time.
And while services slowly started coming back in the afternoon, for some, it's still a waiting game.
So how does something like this happen? Let's get the perspective from Ritesh Kotek, a Canadian cybersecurity consultant and tech analyst. When you heard the news this morning and saw all these systems shutting down, what was your reaction?
My initial reaction is, what happened and how can this happen in the first place? Clearly, given the time of when we started hearing about the outages, that's usually when these massive updates happen at an enterprise level. That's because you have the least amount of users. So I kind of right off the bat thought, okay, it seems like maybe there's an update gone wrong, some sort of network issue, but how can this happen in the first place? Usually when you do these updates, they're tested. You use a sandboxed environment. It's not as simple as just hitting the update button. So when we started hearing about services going down, businesses being disrupted, my initial thought was, how could this happen and why was it not tested?
Okay, that was your initial thought. Hours have passed now, though I know we don't have very specific answers. But now, as you look back at it, do you have any greater insight into how it wasn't tested properly?
We still don't know exactly why this bug impacted Microsoft users in particular. And these are endpoints, so your laptops, your computers, your virtual machines, or your servers that were impacted, and obviously the stuff that ran on it. Corporations couldn't function. We still don't know the exact from a technical perspective, but what we do know is very quickly a patch, so a remedy, a fix, was made available when the initial issue was discovered. So it was very quick. But to kind of reverse the updates, to roll back the clock, to get the new system and the new update up and running, to ensure that all the settings are correct, that has taken some time. There's still systems that are down. I'm sure there'll be multiple systems that'll come back online and be at 100% in the coming days. But that's kind of my initial thoughts with everything going on, and kind of what to make of this.
We all saw the impact it had on the airline industry, lots of delays and confusion at airports in Canada and particularly in the United States. And I thought that was interesting because the aviation industry is used to a really robust system for investigating its own failures. And when there is a failure in aviation, everybody within the industry learns about it and makes changes. What about in this industry, in software? Do you think the lessons that come out of this will be shared among other companies and other users to make it unlikely this will happen again in the future?
When it comes to diagnosing exactly what happened, we really have it down pat in the physical world. But when it happens in the virtual world with these types of updates, it seems like we still have a lot of work to do. And maybe one of the things coming out of this is how do we identify these issues, and how do we have a global response and even create a global standard to ensure that there's the appropriate business processes in place, that redundancies are built in, that it doesn't happen where one update ends up crippling entire sectors. And I think that this is one learning, essentially, lesson that needs to come out of this is how are we going to address not just this outage, but future outages, which are inevitable.
And so how confident are you, Ritesh, that these kinds of industry-wide changes will be made so we don't see stuff like this happening again?
I'm confident that there is going to be some changes that are going to come out of it. Clearly, having a global outage means that organizations suffer. The bottom line suffers. And I think when you start putting dollars and cents towards these types of problems, that we're going to start seeing some changes. But what are those changes? I think we got to break it up into two categories. The first one being technical, so ensuring that you have the right infrastructure in place. You don't have all your eggs in one basket. And the second being from a business standpoint, making sure that you have the right processes in place. So there's redundancy built in, that there's resilience built in, and you have some sort of continuity in place. And I think if those conversations start to happen, I'm pretty confident that this is going to be taken seriously. There'll be better information sharing, and we'll be able to address what's going to be inevitable, which are future outages.
It is a sobering reminder of how vulnerable so many of the things around us are to a bug in the system. Ritesh, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up, Canadians looking to save on groceries have few options in this country.
We adjust our margins so we can keep those staple items that we know they need.
How some dollar stores are looking to change that next.
Your total is $250, okay?
Grocery bills surging.
$8 for 5 slices of turkey.
Canadians searching.
Canadians are looking at the grocers and saying, this is too expensive.
While in the U.S., shoppers turn to dollar stores for big savings.
My juices, cabinet items, pantry goods.
In Canada, that discount option is limited, but is it changing? Back in May, Anya Zolojowski took her shopping cart into dollar stores on both sides of the border and shows why, for affordable food, Canadians are starving for choices.
If you live in Toronto, you need to run to Loblaws and get this right away. You're gonna get nothing, zero. You're gonna buy nothing at Loblaws because it's too expensive.
Canadians are fed up.
Your total is $250, okay?
$8 for 5 slices of turkey.
Are cheap groceries even possible? We're actually making this breakfast with an omelet, yogurt, waffles, even a smoothie, with items bought at an American dollar store, where there are more low-cost food options available. Because typically, you can't find food like this at a Canadian dollar store. But could that change? We're in Buffalo, New York, because believe it or not, a ton of grocery items, fresh and frozen and cheap, are available at dollar stores across the US.
Let's make some Dollar Tree gumbo.
Social media is buzzing with recipes made entirely with food bought at dollar stores.
You can make this 3-course date night dinner for just $15.
Prices start at $1.25. Cheese, bottles of milk, frozen fruit, with some, like frozen pizza and meats, maxing out at $5. I just got a ton of groceries at the Dollar Tree. It cost about $50 Canadian, but there is a lot of food in here. I got food for breakfast, lunches, dinners. I would say I have about 4 days worth of food here. It's a big help for shoppers like Joanne.
Name brand products, excellent. Frozen vegetables. I mean, I have family that comes and runs here and gets stuff because it's cheaper than in the grocery stores.
And Queen.
My juices, cabinet items, pantry goods.
Here in Canada, you could probably find stuff like this macaroni at a Dollarama, but not things like this frozen asparagus or this cream cheese that we used here, which was $1.25 American at the Dollar Tree. Here in Canada, the comparable option we could find was about $2.50 Canadian or $3 Canadian. So I don't eat meat, but we found this frozen salmon for $5 American. The Dollar Tree also had bacon, sausage, whatever you want, really. Here in Canada, we found a similar salmon for $8 Canadian. Dollar stores are not typically grocery stores, but in Dollarama, you can find bread, soups, canned foods at a discount, in part because they limit brands. But they have no freezers, no fresh food, and no plans to expand their offerings. They didn't tell us why. 5 companies dominate Canada's grocery scene. Canada's Competition Bureau says more could help prices, including by allowing foreign chains into our market.
Canadians are just shopping differently. So they're looking at the grocers and saying, this is too expensive to me, for my family. So I'm going to channels where food is cheaper, like dollar stores.
Dalhousie's Sylvain Charlebois co-authored Canada's latest food price report. Families are spending $700 more a year. The biggest price jump was in bakery, meats, and vegetables.
Food inflation is just the tip of the iceberg. It's a problem, but the larger problem for Canadians is price volatility.
Prices are usually more predictable in dollar stores. But is supply? According to one investigation out of Halifax, Dollarama was prohibited from selling bread because it was too close to a Sobeys. In an email, Dollarama said it doesn't comment on its leases. Sobeys didn't respond to multiple requests. I'm in Minto, New Brunswick, about an hour and a half outside of Moncton, where the Great Canadian Dollar Store is trying to expand its grocery offerings to meet demand. It's nearly tripled since the pandemic. Could you show me some of the grocery offerings that you have?
Absolutely. So first off, we have our local potatoes. As you can see, we can't keep it full.
Belinda Hughes is with the Great Canadian Dollar Store. They're in smaller communities across Canada, with headquarters in New Brunswick. Just down from staple foods like beans and pasta, and the party favors and greeting cards.
So this is where we're expanding.
Fridges and freezers were installed 2 years ago.
We're trying to do our best, again, with the communities that we live in, to bring in the staple products. So starting here, right, and
meat, chicken burgers, okay.
Yeah.
59 stores have done this so far, selling frozen meats, cheeses, dairy, and it's new territory for stores like this. But Belinda says customers asked them to offer more. One big seller is bologna.
Flies off the shelf.
Wow.
The big stick bolognas, absolutely. In a Newfoundland store, we can't keep them.
So how does this dollar store do it? They buy bulk,
as local as possible, and have high turnover of products so prices can remain stable.
It's predictable. Yeah, we adjust our margins so we can keep those staple items that we know they need, the basic items, and we can adjust our margins with the other items that we have.
Prices are pretty comparable to the local Foodland, owned by Sobeys. Still, Belinda would like to expand beyond processed foods.
They may not be the healthiest, but then they can go to a grocery store and supplement that.
With the
Add
fruits
the
and
fresh,
veggies.
yes, the
Have
fresh
you
produce.
considered bringing in fresh produce?
We are. That's it. Yeah,
You
we're sourcing that
are?
as we speak.
But produce is harder to stock and sell.
You see, healthy categories like produce, all these categories, prices are incredibly volatile.
And that's the problem in Canada. It can be tough to find fresh food items at affordable prices.
And that person walks away from that thinking that that category is unaffordable for me and for my family. So price volatility is a killer for healthy lifestyles.
People want more options, more food in more stores that is healthy, priced fairly and predictably.
And an update on Anya's story. This week, all major grocers in Canada agreed to sign the Grocery Code of Conduct. And while it may not affect food prices directly, it aims to level the playing field between the big chains and smaller independent grocers. And on Sunday, Anya has another story just in time for the Paris Olympics.
In Paris, these athletes are Canada's secret weapon.
Gold medalist Sarah Minton.
From hammer throw to shot put. Some of Canada's biggest medal hopes are coming from throwers.
Rogers is the champion here in Budapest.
And they're ready for some big results.
My mindset going into Paris is that it's just another opportunity to succeed.
It's kind of a different animal, I think, the Olympics, and it's something that I have to prepare for now and get focused for.
Everything that we've been doing over the years has led to this, and being a force to be reckoned with on the world stage.
That story and others coming up as we count down to the Olympics. Our chief correspondent, Adrian Arsenault, will be hosting the show from Paris all next week, leading up to the opening ceremonies on Friday, July 26th on CBC and CBC Gem. Coming up, a young soccer phenom makes history on the pitch.
And Kevin Sullivan, the history maker, now enters this arena.
The record-setting teen and his youthful debut next in our moment. This is 14-year-old Kevin Sullivan. Like many young soccer players, he's dreamt of playing with the pros, and now he's made that dream a reality. This week, the midfielder made history when making his MLS debut for the Philadelphia Union, becoming the youngest player ever to make a regular season debut. His record-setting moment is our moment.
14 years and 293 days old, breaking Freddie Adu's record for the youngest MLS debutant by 13 days.
I mean, obviously I dreamed of this day, and I had some pictures in my mind of what it would look like, but the fans, every time I touched the ball, they went crazy. Just hearing them behind my back every time the ball was at my foot was crazy to me.
And Kevin Sullivan, the history maker, now enters this arena.
Look, this is just the start. Really happy to have done this, but it's honestly the first box checked off. So long journey ahead. I know it's all about where you finish, not where you start. So if I didn't make it today, or if I didn't make it Saturday, and I was the second youngest or the third youngest, as long as I make my debut and I start my career here, doesn't matter to me. I'm just gonna keep working, and keep developing here. So my main focus is on Philadelphia and our season ahead.
So that player that he's, 14 days younger than, Freddie Adu, that was a precocious debut for him, also 14 years old, but ended up not having a superstar career. So as Kevin points out, it's not just where you start, it's where you finish. But so far, apparently the reviews are he is a remarkably talented young man. That is the National for July 19th. Join me Sunday for Cross Country Checkup on CBC Radio and CBC News Network, and later that night, right here for the National. Have a great Saturday.